Welcome to this online lecture about values in design, and we'll discuss how you can identify your personal values and how you can map the values of stakeholders, and that all for meaningful innovation. So first of all, what do we mean with values? Values can be something that is important to you or to designers or the stakeholders, or something useful. It is sort of a quality that you can use throughout your design project. It's a goal where you can aim for, but a bit more long-term than just the design goal. It is usually defined as what people find important in their lives. But before we start with identifying your personal values, I want to say a few things why values in design are so important. We as designers implement values of stakeholders, of clients into our designs through requirements, and we can really steer the behavior of people that use these products that we design. And so being aware of the values, the consequences that come from these values is very important. Or the lack of value. So if you focus too much on efficiency, you might exclude certain groups of users or discriminate users from certain neighborhoods to use certain facilities. The second example is that of an app where you can check in certain places. It's wonderful to see where your friends are and to meet them. But if somebody had said that it was ill and you see them check in somewhere, that might be an unexpected consequence and not related to the original values that you had. There are many of these examples of intentional or unintentional consequences of certain values that are embedded in design. So being aware of your values, of the stakeholder values, and the consequences is important. Yet what you find important is often not so much considered in design. We have tools to map out stakeholders, but it's also important to start with your own motivations. So what are your own long-term personal values? So we'll also address that today. If you want to have a successful result within your project, it is very useful or important that you stay close to what you believe in, what you value yourself, to avoid, a lack of motivation, even a burnout or too much frustration or conflict whilst you're not standing for these values. That's where we start today with your personal values. So in the scheme of things, of who you are, values are in between the motives that you have and the attitude that you portray. So you start with yourself, that's you, that's your core, then you have your motivations and values are derived from that. The attitude is then resulting from your values, and actions are the results of your attitude. So these are the interrelations between the values and that you have and yourself and your actions. This pyramid shows the different levels of values that you can prioritize. We as people prioritize values. On the ground level, we have human nature, and in this level you find the universal values. And these are the values that relate to us as a human. For example, security or passion or caring for one another. On the second level, you have the culture, the professional values that you can see in design practice. And in design professional, we value, for example, empathy or sustainability. And these values are really embedded in the way you work as a design professional. And then last is your own values. What are the things that you find important that really relate to you as a professional designer and that you strive for? So for example, in my case, I really value creativity and sustainability, and I really want to see these things coming back in the way I teach or the way I design things or the way I research things. These are my most most important values. So there, as you can see here, is the cheat sheet of these three levels, and for each of these levels you can ask yourself questions. So, for example, in the personal level, are you aware of your own values, and what do you find important if you work on projects? Is there some general pattern? If you're maybe unaware, maybe you see something returning every time. And for design values, are you aware of the common values of IDE or design in general? And the societal values that relates to the stakeholders of the project, or things that is more generally important. And there are tools to identify and explore and map these values. So we'll start with your personal values. What are the things that are most important to you? And a tool that you can use is this value map. You see different sections with values. There's one universal value, and with some words underneath it that belong to that universal value. So, for example, you have self-direction, and within these values there is freedom, independence, curiosity, and each of these groups represent a certain type of values, and that is represented in this values circle or circumflex. And you see that each type belongs to a certain overarching goal. So, for example, self-direction belongs to openness for change, or openness to change. And this is like the open-mindedness that we also represented at E. Be open to the things, explore things, and these really relate to you as a person, where you can focus on, and growth in general. So it is not based on anxiety or fear, it's really based on developing yourself and growing. So usually you see that designers value these kind of things. Openness to change and self-transcendence values really are helpful for meaningful innovation. These are intrinsic values. These are related to your own motivations. If you focus on these, really help you to create meaningful innovation. The other kind of values are often opposing that or blocking that. For the assignment, it's enough to know what the values are that you find important, and which are really focused on growth and openness and self-transcendence. But you can also really look into what is the meaning or the purpose of these type of values that are represented in this circle. And as you really look closely, you see the difference between the value map with all the words and the circle, but they're related to one another. It is that the value map is from an older study, and they developed it over the years, and in 10 years time they came up with this circumflex. So there are also different tools developed for designers to map values of stakeholders, or to use values in design projects, or do research on values. And there is a whole list of these slides. You can follow the links if you want to explore them. But we'll discuss two in this lecture or video that you can use for the project that you are working on right now. And the first one is the U-value framework, and the other is the value flow model. And I will explain them in the rest of the video. First of all, the framework is based on a research done by a design researcher, and she studied all the values that are represented in literature, either in the design literature or in social sciences, and she really searched which are most important in design. And she made a whole overview and categories of these values. For example, there is respect, that relates to a healthy life, security. So she grouped them in certain ways in major cluster or value groups that you can discuss in design projects with the stakeholders or your design team, or your tutor if you're working alone. And so you can map out or explore all the different values that are potentially important for your project. And she made it in a concrete tool as well. You can find the tool on Blackboard. It's a sort of a wheel where you can prioritize the values. And there is a value words, and the value words are similar to the map, and you can select them and see what they mean for your project. And you can also identify the stakeholders with the personas you made. And in these personas, yeah, you can it can be helpful to discuss it or to represent it in your in your own design journal with these personas. So, for example, if you have a certain type of client, you can represent it by a persona or a user, and you can represent it by another persona. So this is in short the U-Value framework and tool. Formulated an assignment for this, how you can identify the stakeholder values. First of all, you have to identify the stakeholders. Who are the important stakeholders of your project? It could be clients, could be users, but it could also be more distant indirect stakeholders like the community, manufacturers, etc. Identify the stakeholders, and then you can prioritize which values are important for what stakeholder. So if you think of a client, one of the important values is that he or she wants to satisfy the needs of his own clients, or that he wants to generate an income for the business. So yeah, you can discuss that or prioritize that for your own project. You have selected the most important values for your stakeholders. So you can select the top 3 for each stakeholder. You can start ranking them or prioritizing them on the wheel. If you print out the wheel or you copy it on your computer, your laptop, then you can map them out and see where they belong. You have created this overview or completed this value wheel with all the values of your stakeholders. You can also look for potential value differences. So, for example, if you have chosen the value security for a certain stakeholder, that's very important for the community to have to know what's going to happen or to change. That is really opposite to maybe your own value where you want to create an innovative solution. That's something that you can identify these value differences. But if you have identified these value differences, that can come in handy to formulate requirements or things that you want to work on as a designer. So there could be a very important difference between the stakeholder A and stakeholder B that is really important to realize and be aware of when you start designing. If you have done this exercise of mapping out the values of the stakeholders, you can continue with mapping the value flow from one stakeholder to another. So it is often an exchange. So if I sell a product to a consumer, the consumer receives the product in exchange for money. So this is a value exchange. So now the next model will help you to get a grip on what are potentially the value exchanges between different stakeholders, or something that you can change or design if you know and if you have mapped out the value flow between the different stakeholders. So how are you going to make this map? An example of the map, you see that the user is central and there are really a lot of stakeholders around that. So you can do that on a sheet of paper yourself. You map out the different stakeholders. Don't forget to include yourself as a stakeholder in the project because you have also your own goals. And then you map out the different exchanges. So there is you as a designer, you exchange ideas with the client, and the client then can exchange product plans to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer can hire a supplier. So you map out all these things and where does the value transition to the other party involved or stakeholder involved in the whole project. 3 major categories of value that you can exchange. That is monetary value, knowledge, and goods. So it could fit in either one of these categories, but be more specific. What amount of money or what type of knowledge or what specific goods are exchanged. After this video, you start with identifying your personal values using the value map or the value circumplex. So identify, highlight which resonate with yourself, and then select a top 3 for this project that you want to work on. Then you map the stakeholder values using the value wheel. And if you have a complete picture of all the values and the stakeholders, you can start the next model, and that's the value flow model, where you can map out the exchanges between the different stakeholders. So hopefully these 3 steps will help you to get a good starting point. From there on, you can start formulating requirements, and we'll discuss that tomorrow in class.